now.
Okay, so my name is John Spritzler. I am, although you can't see him, my son Abram is behind the video camera, and I'm his father. Abram was born in Jamaica Plain, and that's because his mom and I moved here in 1975. And, I've lived here until 1994. I now live just a short distance away in Brighton. And I'll just say a little bit about myself, my background. In 2012, I retired from Harvard School of Public Health, where I was a research scientist for 20 years. And the way I ended up doing that is I went to school at Dartmouth in 64 to 68, got very active in the anti-war movement, anti-Vietnam War movement. Was one of the leaders of the effort there that took over the administration building in 1969 and abolished the Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, and kept it abolished for 10 years, actually. And during that, I ended up becoming a member of a communist organization called the Progressive Labor Party, Marxist-Leninist organization. I did what they told me for a few years, decided with a lot of other people in Boston, actually, that it wasn't the right thing, but never really, at least at the time, didn't firmly know what was wrong about it. It just seemed not to be right, and there was some corruption involved and so forth. So I left that. Spent the 80s raising children, teaching in the vocational school at Keefe Tech in Framingham for 10 years. Then decided I wanted to do something else. I became a student at the Harvard School of Public Health in biostatistics, and got my doctoral degree there, and then got hired as a research scientist and was there for 20 years. And during the 80s, I basically had given up hope about changing the world in the way that I had earlier had that hope in the 60s, along with millions of other people. And so I spent the 80s having the same aspirations, but not having any hope about them. And a friend of mine who recently passed away, named Dave Stratman, had been active in Boston with parents during the anti-busing busing crisis. And he was also part of the Progressive Labor Party, but he learned something which was profound, and which was that the left was wrong. The left's attitude towards people comes right from Marx, is that ordinary people, working class people, are dehumanized by capitalism. Marx describes them as being almost like animals, quoting Adam Smith to that effect, in factory work and so forth. And the left basically has contempt for actual working class people, dismisses them as racist, as homophobic, as selfish, as complicit in the crimes of the American government, as sheeple. Read any leftist literature, and it's dominated by how ordinary people are bad and need to be changed, have their values changed, class consciousness or whatever they call it, by the revolutionaries. So people look at Che Guevara, but he's an example of this. He talks about the need to create a new socialist man because the existing people are not good and need to be remolded and changed by communists. So the problem with the left is that, as Dave Stratman, my friend, came to understand by being involved with people in Dorchester and other parts of Boston in challenging the busing and the Garrity-Hicks alliance, basically, to whip up a race war, learned that the working people in Boston, black and white, basically had the same aspirations for a better world, and in particular better schools for all the kids, black and white, who were all suffering from a terrible school system. And he learned that in the small little corner of the world over which people have any real control, they try to shape the world with very positive values, with treating people as equals, caring about other people, a sense of concern for others or mutual aid, making decisions, with people as equals, which is what democracy is about, and that this is how people live their ordinary lives, their everyday lives, in the small little corner of the world that they have any control over. But we live in a society where people with the very opposite values have the real control over the big decisions in our society, and so people are always under attack for any effort they make, especially on a larger than very personal level, to shape the world by these positive values. But so what that means is that the goal of revolution is not to change people from bad to good, but to help people develop confidence in the fact that it's their values which are the positive values, that whatever is good in society is a result of those values that struggle to exist in the face of attacks from those above. So the purpose, the goal, the task of a revolutionary is to give people confidence in their values and to understand the revolutionary significance of those values, which typically people don't think of them as political. They just think of them as being decent, good, and so forth. They don't think of them as the values which, if they shape the whole world, it would be a revolution, but they are. That's what those values are. Well, so I met Dave, or became acquainted with him around these ideas. He wrote a book called We Can Change the World, The Real Meaning of Everyday Life, in 1990, around 1990. And so the two of us talked about, well, what should we do with this insight? And so what we came up with was a couple of things that didn't pan out in terms of trying to organize, but we started a web page, the newdemocracyworld.org webpage that I edit, and we wrote a lot of articles, he and I, applying this insight to various aspects of life, but we didn't really know how to act on these ideas. Until around 2011, we started to think seriously about how to act on these ideas in a different way, and then my son Abram, got involved in this thought process, and what we realized is that the main obstacle to people building a revolutionary movement around these values is two related things. One is that what Margaret Thatcher famously called TINA, there is no alternative, T-I-N-A for that. There's the idea that a lot of people have, which is that as bad as the system is that we have today, there is no better alternative. The communist alternative has been demonstrated to be extremely anti-democratic, and it certainly cannot be held up as a positive, inspiring alternative. And what else is there? A theocratic supreme ruler? I mean, there's not much that people are aware of to give them hope, to even have a vision that there is an alternative. So we thought hard about what is that alternative, and we wrote something called Thinking About Revolution, where we outlined what we later called, but not at the time, egalitarianism, which has two basic aspects. One about the political, the governmental aspect, and the other about the economic aspect. The political aspect is that genuine democracy really means that people who share these fundamental values of equality and concern for one another, all the people who share those values in a community are the ones, and they're the only ones, who can make laws the people in that community have to obey. No higher government, no central committee, no federal government, no Supreme Court above can order those good people and tell them they have to do this, they have to do that. So does that mean that there's only local, we call them local assemblies of egalitarians now, does that mean that there's only local order only on a local scale? And the answer is no. But there are two ways for order on a large scale, even a planetary, global scale, to be achieved. One is the way we're used to, which is the authoritarian principle, which is that someone gets control of the highest level of government, and you have to obey them, no matter what, whether you agree or disagree, because, according to this principle, they are the authority, and they have to be obeyed. And so we reject that principle. The alternative way of achieving order on a large scale is voluntary federation. That means that local assemblies of egalitarians form mutual agreements to do things on a large scale, whatever it happens to be. Create a university, create a huge economic enterprise, send a man to Mars. I mean, it could be as big as you want. And it can be done by mutual agreement. And the way the mutual agreements of this kind can be achieved is by local assemblies sending delegates to meet with other delegates from other local assemblies. And the key thing is, in voluntary federation, though, is that these, you can call them higher level assemblies because they're made up of delegates from local assemblies. But they are not lawmaking bodies. Their role is to craft proposals which are either accepted or not accepted for implementation by people at the local level. Because any proposal, no matter what, to be implemented has to be implemented by human beings, and every human being is at some local level somewhere. And so what that would mean in practice is that there would be a back and forth negotiations, you know, with a proposal, and then people saying, well, I like it except blah, blah, and then the Assembly of Delegates modifies it until enough local assemblies.
Hello.
Hi.
Join you.
Have a seat. Help yourself. Until enough local assemblies agree with the proposal and a sufficient number of them to implement it. So that's voluntary federation. Local assemblies can send delegates to bodies, which in turn can send delegates to higher bodies, et cetera, and so forth. You could end up imagining a global, you know, like looking a little bit like the United Nations in terms of composition, but its role would be to make proposals to be accepted by all the levels that sent delegates to it, and if they agree, then they, you know, ask for agreement or not from the levels below them, back and forth, and you ultimately can have a decision to all drive on the left side of the road, or whatever, okay? The fact is that voluntary federation as a means of order was perfectly, wonderfully adequate for Europe, for the entire railroad system in the 1800s. There was no central body, but you could ride as a passenger, send freight from west of France to Russia, going through a zillion different railroad companies with different you know, setups and everything. They had conferences where they made mutual decisions, and it worked fine. So the idea that you need, in order to have social order, you need to have a dictator. Be he or she elected or not is sort of secondary, you know, is not true. So that's the real genuine democracy as we understand it with egalitarianism. The economic aspect of egalitarianism is this. It's a society, first of all, to help understand it, you need to understand that there's no money involved in an egalitarian economy. In a society based on money, it is true that you need money. But in a society that's not based on money, it's not true that you need money. To just help you begin to think about it, think about a family. You know, does the mother or father say to the child, well, dinner's $10, do you have it? I mean, the money's not involved in how things are done within a family, right? So, what we call it is a sharing economy. It's based on the principle from each according to ability to each according to need or reasonable desire. And a lot of people have heard that phrase and they think, oh, that's Karl Marx, that's communism. The fact is, Marx popularized the phrase. The phrase in that pithy form was first written in French by a French abbé long before Marx. And the idea, you know, I don't know when the idea was first said by anybody, but I do know that it was at least as far back as the Bible, because Acts, as we point out in this I believe that we ask people to sign, Acts 4:34-35 describes how the disciples decided to live, and that's the way it says they decided to live. So the idea is as old as, at least as old as the New Testament, and I'm sure it's older. I just haven't tracked it back further. And the reason it's an old idea is because it's a good idea. It's an exemplification of the golden rule applied to economics. That's all. And so, in order for society to be based on that principle, a sharing economy, it's not hard to imagine how that would happen. It would basically be that people would be free to give according to ability in some fashion, wherever it appealed to them, wherever they found, a place where they thought that they could do that, or a way that they could do that. And everybody who was contributing in that fashion would be what we call in good standing. And people who are in good standing, by virtue of that fact, have the right to take for free products and services that are plentiful enough, and those that are scarce, they are have a right to have a chance of getting them when they're rationed in some equitable manner according to need.
Would there be some way to measure all this?
Well, it's not about measurement that much. That's the interesting thing. We're not talking about labor hours and stuff like that. We're talking about any more than people within a family measure how much the child eats. If he eats too much and there's no food, then people say, well, gee, we got to get more food in the house, right? But it's not a question of measuring how much did Bobby eat.
Well, in a society, it's complicated and complex like ours, and
I understand.
how would that work?
I understand,
Oh,
but the complexity is resolved in this way.